The Detroit Lions just received a wave of draft momentum, and if you've been worried about the trenches, this is exactly the kind of development you wanted to see. PFF released grades centered specifically on true pass sets, and that matters more than people realize. These are pure drop-back situations. No play action, no chip help, no extra protection. Just a tackle lined up across from a defensive lineman and asked one simple question: can you block him one-on-one? That's real football evaluation. And according to those grades, there is legitimate depth at offensive tackle right around where the Lions are expected to pick. One of the names generating attention is Trezu 3, who is hovering around pick 89, right in the range of Detroit's second-round selection. That's significant, because when you evaluate this roster honestly, left tackle is not a luxury conversation anymore. With Taylor Decker's situation tied heavily to cap flexibility, there's a very real possibility that Detroit moves on in order to create financial room. And we already know Dan Skipper is no longer part of the playing roster and has transitioned to the coaching staff. That leaves a gap, not a developmental gap, a real starting caliber tackle gap. And here's the part that should excite you. The draft doesn't just have one or two options. The top of the board includes a highly regarded tackle from Miami, considered one of the most pro-ready prospects available. Olu Fashanu is another name consistently projected in the range where Detroit could realistically land him if things fall a certain way. There's also strong second-round talent coming out of Northwestern and additional guard tackle hybrids that project well in pass protection. This isn't a thin class. It's deep exactly where Detroit needs help. But let's be honest with each other. Drafting a rookie lineman isn't always plug-and-play dominance. We saw that last season. It took time for cohesion to build. Remember that early game against Green Bay? It was rough. The line didn't look like the elite unit we had grown accustomed to watching. It took about 5 weeks before things really started humming. So while depth is encouraging, expecting instant perfection from a rookie is unrealistic. That's the balancing act Brad Holmes has to navigate. On the defensive side, the Senior Bowl one-on-one drills also brought good news. Edge rushers graded extremely well in isolation reps. Derek Moore out of Michigan generated serious buzz with viral clips showing his explosiveness and power. Zion Young also stood out. And if you're asking what direction this front office is leaning, it would be surprising if it isn't offensive or defensive line. Last year proved how much trench dominance dictates outcomes. When the offensive line was elite, Detroit controlled games. When it wasn't, everything became harder. The same principle applies defensively. Pressure changes everything. There's another layer to this that might have flown under the radar. An analysis ranking teams that finished last in their division but have the best chance to finish first next year placed Detroit at the top. That's not accidental. The Lions finished fourth, yet somehow had the best point differential within the division. That's the kind of statistical quirk that tells you the foundation is stronger than the final standings suggest. And because of that fourth-place finish, Detroit benefits from a more favorable schedule. Instead of facing division winners in certain crossover games, they draw theoretically weaker opponents. That's a 3-game swing over the course of a season that matters. Now look at the core that's already here. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, Penei Sewell, Christian Mahogany, Tate Ratledge. That's not a rebuild roster. That's a foundation. If Mahogany and Ratledge take the expected developmental step forward, you have 3 of 5 offensive line positions feeling stable long-term. Sewell on one side, young interior talent emerging, but center remains unresolved. Left tackle remains unresolved, and those are not minor details. There are free agent options like Tyler Linderbaum potentially becoming available, though cost will be a serious factor. Detroit does not have unlimited cap space to maneuver. So, the question becomes philosophical as much as tactical. Does Brad Holmes target specific needs and fill holes directly? Or does he continue leaning into best player available, trusting his board the way he has in previous drafts? Early in his tenure, that strategy delivered franchise cornerstones, but the margin for error tightens as the roster gets better. Aggressive misses can't happen anymore. This team isn't building from the ground up. It's trying to climb from competitive to championship caliber. The draft board is shaping up favorably. The schedule sets up favorably. The core talent is in place, but the decisions made at tackle, center, and edge rusher will define whether this is a bounce-back surge or another season of almost. So here's the question for you. Do you want Brad Holmes to aggressively target offensive line and defensive line early and secure the trenches? Or would you rather see him stick strictly to best player available no matter the position? Let me know what you think, because this is where the debate really starts to get serious. If you believe this roster is close, and all signs suggest it is, then every draft pick has to be viewed through the lens of immediate impact versus long-term long-term value. And that's why the offensive line conversation keeps circling back to urgency. If Taylor Decker is not part of the long-term plan due to cap flexibility, then you are not just replacing a starter, you are replacing stability. Left tackle is not a developmental luxury position. It protects everything. It protects the quarterback. It protects the structure of the offense. It protects your ability to stretch the field with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams. And it protects the rhythm that allows Jahmyr Gibbs to operate in space. When that spot is unsettled, the entire offense feels it. Now, some fans will say, just draft a tackle in round 2 and develop him. And in theory, yes, the depth in this class makes that possible. The true pass set grades show that there are multiple prospects capable of holding up 1-1, which is a strong translation metric to the NFL. But development takes time, and this team is not in a patient phase. With Sam Laporta emerging as a difference maker and Penei Sewell already playing at an elite level, the window isn't theoretical anymore. It's active. The interior isn't fully settled either. Christian Mahogany and Tate Ratledge represent promise. The expectation is that the young guard duo takes a meaningful step forward. If that happens, Detroit could feel very confident about 3 of 5 line spots. But center remains a glaring question. There's no way around it. You cannot go into a season unsure about the player making protection calls. That's why the mention of Tyler Linderbaum as a potential free agent option sparks intrigue. The problem is financial reality. Detroit doesn't have endless flexibility. Every signing would require sacrifices elsewhere. That brings us back to Brad Holmes' philosophy. Historically, he has leaned toward best player available rather than drafting strictly for need. That approach landed foundational pieces like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Penei Sewell. Those weren't panic picks. They were conviction picks. But here's the tension. When you're building, you can afford to stack talent and sort it out later. When you're competing, holes become magnified. And let's shift to the defensive line, because that side of the trenches cannot be ignored. The Senior Bowl one-on-one drills highlighted edge players who can win isolated battles. Derek Moore generated buzz with his explosiveness and hand usage. Zion Young showed power and disruption ability. Those are traits that translate, and when Detroit's defensive front was at its best, it made life easier for the entire secondary. Pressure masks, coverage flaws. It shortens plays. It creates turnovers. If this draft truly is deep along both offensive and defensive lines, that's the kind of alignment front offices dream about. Need meets value. But execution is everything. Reaching for a need too early can backfire. Waiting too long can leave you exposed. The scheduling advantage also adds pressure to get this right. Finishing 4th in the division gives Detroit a more favorable slate compared to the division winner. That 3-game swing could realistically determine playoff seeding. If the Bears face tougher crossover opponents, while Detroit draws theoretically lighter matchups like the Cardinals instead of the Seahawks, that matters in December. You don't waste schedule advantages. You capitalize on them. And think about the psychological factor. This team finished last in the division, but had the best point differential within it. That tells you they were competitive. It tells you margins were thin. It tells you small upgrades in the trenches could flip multiple outcomes. So now we're staring at a pivotal offseason decision tree. Draft a pro-ready tackle early and secure the blind side. Invest in an edge rusher who can consistently win without blitz help. Target a center in free agency if the cap allows. Or trust the board and let value dictate the direction, even if it means addressing a position that feels less urgent. This isn't about rebuilding, it's about refining. It's about tightening the few loose bolts on an otherwise strong structure. Because whichever direction you choose, you're shaping the identity of this team for the next 5 years, not just the next season. If you lock down left tackle early in the draft, you're making a statement that this offense remains the engine. You're saying that protecting the quarterback, establishing control at the line of scrimmage, and keeping the rhythm intact for Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Sam Laporta is the priority. You're investing in continuity. With Penei Sewell already anchoring one side and Christian Mahogany plus Tate Ratledge expected to grow inside, a young tackle could solidify the structure long term. That gives Detroit cost control at a premium position and keeps the offense sustainable even as contracts get bigger. But if you go edge rusher early, that's a different message. That says last season's defensive inconsistencies cannot repeat themselves. It says the front office believes pressure is the fastest way to tilt games. When you watched the moments where the defensive line struggled to consistently win, it changed everything. Quarterbacks had time. Coverage got stretched, drives extended. Adding a pass rusher who can win one-on-one without scheme help instantly elevates the entire defense. And remember, the Senior Bowl evaluations matter because they isolate traits. When Derek Moore flashed in those drills, it wasn't about scheme. It was pure ability. Zion Young showed he could generate power and disrupt balance. Those types of players don't need perfect conditions to make impact plays. They create chaos on their own. The other layer here is timing. A rookie tackle tackle may take weeks to stabilize, a rookie edge rusher can sometimes contribute situationally right away while developing into a full-time force. But elite tackles are harder to find than productive rotational pass rushers. That's the long-term calculus. Then there's the center situation, still hovering over everything. If Detroit cannot secure a reliable answer in free agency due to cap limits, that pressure shifts back to the draft board. Do you invest early in a center, knowing how critical communication and protection calls are? Or do you trust internal development and focus premium capital elsewhere? That decision will ripple through every offensive snap. Brad Holmes has built credibility with bold but calculated moves. His early drafts produced cornerstone players, but as the roster matured, expectations rose. This is no longer about patience. This is about precision. Aggressive swings that miss are more costly now because the margin between winning the division and finishing fourth can be razor thin. And don't forget the schedule factor working in Detroit's favor. A more manageable slate provides opportunity, but it also removes excuses. If you have the advantage on paper, you must convert it into wins. Strengthening the trenches on either side directly impacts how well you capitalize on that opportunity. So here we are, a deep draft class at positions of need. A roster with foundational stars already in place, cap constraints forcing disciplined choices, and a front office philosophy that has to balance best player available with obvious roster gaps. This isn't a flashy offseason headline story. It's a structural one. It's about reinforcing the core so that late-season football looks different than it did before. It's about making sure that when December games tighten up, Detroit has the physical edge to control outcomes instead of reacting to them. Now, as we close this out, think about the long-term vision. Would you rather secure the blindside protector who keeps this offense elite for years, or add the disruptive defender who makes opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable every single snap? And before you click away, let's push this one step further, because the free agency angle could completely reshape everything we've talked about. If Detroit manages to create cap flexibility and address center in free agency, even with a mid-tier reliable veteran rather than a splash signing that changes the draft board dramatically, suddenly you're not forced into reaching for interior help. You can walk into draft night with leverage. And leverage is power. When you're not desperate, you make better decisions. That's when best player available actually works in your favor instead of against you. But if center remains unresolved going into the draft, that tension builds. Because now you're juggling left tackle uncertainty, interior communication concerns, and the need for defensive pressure all at once. That's not ideal. Championship caliber teams usually enter the draft with flexibility, not urgency. The encouraging part is this: the Lions are not starting from scratch. The offensive core is legitimate. Amon-Ra State, Brown has proven to be one of the most dependable playmakers in football. Jahmyr Gibbs brings explosive balance. Jameson Williams stretches defenses vertically. Sam Laporta has already established himself as a serious mismatch weapon. And Penei Sewell remains the tone setter in the trenches. That's a nucleus you can build around confidently. On defense, the flashes